that's an important question as well that no one wants to ask. Could he have done it a different way and achieved the same outcome? I don't think he could have. What's up, guys? Welcome back. So we thought we'd start off with a bang, start with the most controversial thing that we thought we could actually talk about, and that is the Trump-DeSantis 2024 ticket. Who should it be? Should it be Trump? Should it be DeSantis?
And wait, are you saying it should be Trump-DeSantis?
VP? No, I don't see that happening. No, I don't. That's not going to happen. I mean, people that are saying that, I'm like,
I used to have thought it was probably inevitable, and it wouldn't at this point. I wouldn't be totally
I wouldn't be shocked
if
it
one day
it
did, but no, I don't think it's this time.
I'm actually under the assumption that I don't even think DeSantis is going to run.
No,
I don't think he's going to come out. Everybody's like, yeah, Trump DeSantis race, and I'm like, man, I don't see that. It just makes no sense for his political career to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be folly for him to do it if he had the aspirations. I mean, just and I want to like DeSantis.
Yeah.
I have no reason really other than more recently and him being pitted against Trump, mainly in the media and as a talking point to
that's the level of his distrust for the media. And I agree with him, right? I mean, like, I'm all about DeSantis, and then I'm like, wait a second, why do they want DeSantis? And so on that point, so let me give a pro argument to why they would want DeSantis, right? So that I can at least continue liking DeSantis. And one of my arguments, and this is not even what we're going to fully talk about, but one of my arguments to why the media wants DeSantis is because it's like, what else is there to say about Trump? Right? Like, they're out of talking point. They're like, I can see them in a room like, guys, listen, we got nothing. Like, we have thrown everything but the kitchen sink at this guy, and we are out of material. Like, we've made up as much as we can make up, and then on the things that we did get him in, they're old news. Like, we can't bring it back up again, like, and it make any sense. Like, we need new material, therefore we need a new candidate. And if you think for a second, if DeSantis was to win, that they would not absolutely destroy that man, you are living under a rock. I mean, your opinion on DeSantis today will be, if you're going to listen to the media the same way, if you listen to the media about DeSantis the same way that most people, Christians out there, listen to the media about Trump, they'll feel almost the same way about DeSantis when this is all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, if you want Gavin Newsom or somebody as president in 2024, then go ahead and think that DeSantis is the better candidate.
Well,
and that's not because he's not, likely actually a better candidate and would, if he were being evaluated or run head-to-head against whoever. I mean, he would be more qualified and a good resume.
Absolutely.
And he would be able to lead. But, yeah, the media is going to tear him apart.
And it's going to be all new information, right? And people are going, we didn't know this about you. You've been living a lie.
Yeah, and then they'll prop up somebody like Newsom or whoever.
Yeah.
And then they'll play their same old games, and he'll make it in office. They'll do the same things with the election.
Well, I think another thing, too, that people are completely underestimating is that people think that DeSantis' popularity in Florida is his popularity around the country. And that's flawed thinking. That's just not true, right? Like, I heard somebody say one time, they were like, the way DeSantis is popular in Florida, Trump is popular around the country, right? Like, DeSantis honestly would have a really hard time winning those blue-collared working states that Trump is going to run away with in 2024. I mean, especially after this Ohio incident, right, where Biden's over in Ohio, in the Ukraine, we have this massive catastrophe going on in Ohio. Trump rides up there with transfer trailers worth of stuff, meets with the people. I mean, political suicide. We're going to talk about that at a later, like what is going on there. That's neither. I don't want to get into that yet because that's a whole nother conversation for next week. But anyways, so why is it in saying all that, right, now that we've kind of flushed out, I don't think there's any way, first of all, that DeSantis would beat Trump in a primary. No way whatsoever. But then I also don't think DeSantis is going to perform anything like Trump on a national stage either, right? And so I don't think he's going to come out, right? I mean, right now he is the best governor in the country, hands down, right? I mean, him and, who should have been, I won't go there, Kerry Lake, Arizona. But anyways, I could see a Kerry Lake Trump ticket now. That could happen.
Yeah, that's at this point, that's where I'm thinking.
Yeah, I could see that. That'd be a sweet ticket. I could see that shaping up. But why is it that every time I post something or I try to encounter a Christian in a church, I don't know why I said a Christian in a church, a Christian about Trump or DeSantis, why is it they immediately go DeSantis? They're just like, oh, DeSantis, get Trump, get him out of there. Right? I mean, like, it's interesting, and I'm not saying all Christians, that's a very general statement.
Yeah,
but most
it depend on the Christian.
Yeah,
that'd be an interesting study. I wouldn't say maybe most that you talk to.
Okay, let me put it this way. Maybe, and this could be wrong. Okay, but I'm going to say this. Most pastors or deacon level Christians say no Trump. Most average level, I guess, I don't know if that's the correct term. Those average Christians like ourselves that are just in the congregation.
The lower ranking Christians.
Us lower ranking Christians, not amongst the Pharisees or the Sadducees, right? They may be more pro-Trump, right? But it's interesting when you get to that upper level of, like, I don't know. Like, for myself personally, most pastors that I talk to are deacons. Maybe it's my circles which are the problem, but they're like, oh God, Trump, God, just I don't want to deal with that man again, right? Get rid of that man. Why is that? What's going on there? How have we got to that place?
Oh, you're asking?
Yeah, I'm asking because I have my opinions, but I want to hear yours before I get there.
It would be interesting to do some sort of like demographic study. It's probably out there, the statistics somewhere, the data on what kind of person typically supports Trump versus DeSantis. And I would say it's probably along similar lines to demographically a similar breakout for who's more likely to be kind of liberal minded or be kind of like to lean that way politically. Even though these people aren't liberal, it's still the similar socioeconomic kind of groups or tendencies.
Liberal minded in what way? Like try to pinpoint some of those.
Well, I'm saying like the interest that person has because they're of a certain socioeconomic group in society that they tend to be they tend to see their interest in certain places. They tend to be persuaded and influenced by certain voices, certain forces, certain things around them, and so versus, and it doesn't always break out this way, but versus other demographics who see their interest in another place and just don't care about those same kind of issues. They already don't fit in with this crowd over here, so they're not worried about if their politics fit in. So you're
saying some liberalism getting into the church?
Yeah, a liberal way of thinking. I'm not saying it's outright, liberalism on the issues or whatever, but it's part of it because you're susceptible.
I want to take care of the poor, therefore I'm more welfare. I'm more government spending to do that. Is that
sometimes? But I'm not even saying that as much, like on the policy level, as just culturally how those people are influenced. They're a part of a different social crowd, and their social crowd is more influenced by this kind of argumentation.
Got it.
They're, the perceptions of Trump and him being so combative and so, either his rhetoric and whether it be harsh and negative and insensitive and all these things, or crude or rude or unintelligent.
So I'm going to add to that because this is my reasoning, right? Well, Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and Trump's so unpeaceful. But Jesus also says he's going to bring a sword.
He comes not to bring peace.
And he comes not to bring peace. So what is going on here? He's the Prince of Peace, but he comes not to bring peace? I don't understand. What's going on, right? So,
and that's another way in which that. Yeah, I mean, there might be a better word, and I'm reluctant to use liberal because of the political connotations. So I don't mean it exactly that same way, but it's even a way of interpreting the Bible and seeing Jesus kind of apart from a full biblical view of who God is and what God's character's like, how God works in the world, how God works through people, including rulers and kings and princes and things in the world.
Yeah, even non-believing rulers and kings and princes, right?
Sure.
Throughout the entire Old Testament, often. Yeah. God literally used, in chapter 12 of Genesis, we could start right there, a Gentile king, think about this, a Gentile king to correct the father of all of Israel. I mean, how humiliating must that have been for Abraham that a Gentile king had to come to him and correct him, right? That would have been pretty humiliating.
Yeah, I mean, the Bible's full of that.
Yeah, that's just, I just started at the very beginning there.
No, but yeah, sure. I mean, and there's just lots of examples ever since.
There's probably examples in your own life where a non-believer has corrected you at some point or another, and you're like, maybe we throw that off like it ain't a big deal, but it ought to be a huge deal because you're supposed to be following the King of Kings and the ruler, and now someone who is not even, expressing that he follows that person is correcting you in his reality because you're not living inside the reality you profess to believe in, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and related to all of this is, then the way in which what you believe about what's going on in the world, and the way your worldview, whether it's your Christian worldview or your worldview otherwise, understands the events that are happening. And as we discuss much here, people's view is influenced so much by the media and the things that shape their outlook, but that people don't tend to see the issues, the things that are happening, what's at stake in this moment as serious as what they are. They're not as great. They tend to think that this is just politics as normal, and so they're just choosing their more preferred Republican in this political debate, where other people see it as more existential, more crucial. I mean, this is life or death kind of scenario that we're in. And so they see then Trump as a warrior for that, standing up for for the things that they see as most important. Trump speaking to those things, his policies directly affect and influence them. And so people are willing to they see him as their champion because he has, not only is he voicing the things that matter to them, but he actually followed through in his first term in office. And so that gained even greater loyalty and won it from even more people, including myself along the way, who initially maybe bought into this kind of argumentation, saw Trump in his first
Did you vote Trump
office.
2020?
2020, yeah, not 2016.
I mean, 2016, sorry.
Yeah, no, I didn't vote for president. I didn't vote for Hillary either.
Yeah.
I just didn't vote because I bought in. I couldn't vote for Trump. How could I vote for that guy?
Yeah.
Although by then I was beginning to come around, but I considered it, and this is a reason why I'm more passionate about this now and become increasingly loyal to him.
I didn't
over
vote for
time.
him either in 2016.
Yeah.
I thought he was a liberal. I was like, this guy's not a conservative.
That kind of thing. Yeah, I thought, like the arguments go, I thought he was just playing
the
the
game.
conservative Christian
Playing the Christians, like,
just
like,
to get
just
in
play
office.
these guys.
Yeah. And I mean, I can see how people would think that, because Trump definitely, he knows how to put on a show. He, in a way, is doing the things that he needs to do for an effect. But I've come to appreciate him, and I mean, I think it ought to be undeniable. Of course, there are people who would deny that the sky's blue, but yet that his policies were consistent with, and I mean, it's been shown. It's been the most accomplished conservative presidency ever.
Well, and to your point, all the people that are saying DeSantis, not Trump, I also could ask them the question, why, or why might you have liked Trump at some level? And they would say, well, I loved what he did, I just didn't like the way he did it. And that's what you'll hear from about all of them. But I have two problems with that. Number one, why didn't anybody else do it? That's the thing that drives me crazy about Christians at times, right? It's like, well, I like what he did, but I don't like the way he did it. Yeah, but nobody else was doing it, right? I would rather somebody that did it and I didn't like the way they do it than somebody that don't do it at all, right? Because a lot of times Christians just sit on the sideline on their hands and then they complain about somebody else doing something the way that they did it. Had this happen to me, right? With a situation in our county and a leadership position, taking an education system, I challenged it and I got on the atheist news on the internet, and everybody in my church, I don't want to go there, but everybody in my church was like, well, I liked what he said and he was right, I just didn't like the way that he said it. And eventually my dad was like, well, why didn't you ever say it? I don't know. Right?
Because they're afraid.
Because you're afraid. That's right. Because you don't want to engage, right? And so it's the same thing that drives me nuts and gets me hot-headed. You know, I have to cool down and drink my cold coffee. But because I get sick of hearing people say, well, I like what he did, I just didn't like the way he did it. They don't ever do anything. And I'm like, then shut up, right? I mean, part of me's like that. And then I got to calm down. But so I hear that a lot. Right, I hear that a lot, but it's also, I think, operating underneath the lie that he could have done it a different way, and I'm not saying he couldn't, and achieved the same outcome. That's an important question as well that no one wants to ask. Could he have done it a different way and achieved the same outcome? I don't think he could have. That's my personal opinion when I think through it, because I try to ask myself, well, what if he would have did it this way, and then everybody would have been a little bit more, like, okay with it, but would he also, like, forced the media to such a place of derangement, right? Like a ravaged dog backed up in a corner saying things that you're like, did they just say the quiet part out loud? Did they really just say that on live television? Right? Like, and I think because Trump beat them at their own game, it drove them to a point that everybody now is sitting back and going, what's happening? Like, look at the things that are being said here. Yeah. Like, and I don't think that happens without Trump going to that level. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, I just don't think you get the same outcome. I think it's naive to think that you do.
And that's why I say that people don't tend to understand the situation for what it is and what it has been. They don't, it's worse than they realize. Therefore, it took somebody like Trump to come in and fight the fight that needed to happen. And nobody else could have done it or would have done it because nobody else is like him. And I mean, that's not an absolute statement, but like it took that kind of person to come in, and we know, and I think if you'd still argue this way, then you still don't see the situation for what it is. Even though there's much more, thanks to Trump, that helps enlighten us to the reality. I'd say the most important, on top of all the policy successes that he had, the most important, effective thing that he did is expose the media. And expose the agenda behind the media, or that uses the media to control and influence the people, that lies to the people.
Drove darkness into light.
Yeah, he by branding them fake news from the beginning and having this adversarial relationship with them that he has, and being himself or being the way that he is and being provocative, they could not help themselves but to try to take him down, and that's for different reasons. A couple of different reasons. One, because he's the antithesis to everything that they think is right and good. This goes back to our kind of early point in the people feel they can relate to Trump, or does he embody who they are? Do they want him to be their representative? In the way that he comes across, they don't want him. They're embarrassed by him, and all the more for the outright liberal. Yeah. You know, they can't stand even side of the side of him or to hear him talk, and so they were very eager to make fun of him, to ridicule him, to antagonize or to prove false anything that he said, and he was masterful at his ability to use that to his advantage and to advance his agenda. But then on top of that, there was the more deceptive nature of what the media does, and outright lying to, deceiving the people, leading the people down a path. And the Trump himself was a huge victim of it. I'd say, all the lies that they told about him along the way, all the ways they tried to get him along the way, were just, if we see the way that they attack him because they hate him, that's only because he is actually representing and advocating and has a policy agenda that is truly in the interest of the people and the nation. Because the powerful forces, the powers that be behind the media, they hate Trump not just because of the personality. It's not even about that. They actually probably know from knowing him that he's not even quite like that. He's just putting on a show, so to speak. But he is advancing a real agenda. They are going after things, and some of it behind the scenes. We've been able to see how it played out, but a lot of it wasn't up front in the news, in part because the news wasn't going to talk about it, and number two, the good guys, the people working for the people, they didn't always broadcast their agenda out front. They were doing it more subtly and secretively, or just kind of behind the scenes getting stuff done because that's the way to get it done. They weren't putting on a show. They were actually performing an operation. And the people in the powerful interest that could see, they too aren't deceived by the media. They know what's really going on. They hate Trump because he's standing up for the interest of the American people, the average person, the global citizen even, and operate, in the interest of each sovereign nation. And so, it's a relentless attack on him, and he withstood it all along the way, all the arguments they threw at him. They might stick momentarily and through constant news cycle trying to prop up the same fake stories.
Constant propaganda in those areas.
But none of it stuck. None of it actually played out. None of the ways that the walls are closing in on him and that he's inevitably going to be exposed for his corruption and
Russian collusion.
None of that has ever stuck, and that goes back to the DeSantis. There's nothing that they can bring against Trump that at this point it's not going to seem like it's going to further expose them, because they're going to be using the same narratives or trying the same tactics, and the people are kind of onto it. But if
think about
DeSantis
Kavanaugh,
along,
right? Let's talk about Kavanaugh, right? Kavanaugh, all the nonsense they used against him, we find out to be lies too. But it mattered in the moment, right? And what we're saying is, whether it's true or not, it's not going to matter. What's going to matter is the picture they're able to paint for the next year going up to the election, if he comes out, which I don't think he's going to. But if he comes out, you don't think they're going to be able to take a lot of information and paint a beautiful picture to destroy that man? Absolutely. DeSantis, yeah. And you know what? Here's the scary part. You're going to believe it. You're going to believe it, church. And you might,
after believing right now he's the better candidate.
That's right.
That he ought to be the candidate instead
that's what
of
I'm
Trump.
saying. Using
believing
the
the media trying
Yes.
to convince you of that, just so Trump is not the candidate.
And that's
anybody but Trump.
That's what I'm driving at. If you use the same line of reasoning that you are right now, which you don't like Trump because the media told you so, you're not going to like DeSantis either because the media is going to tell you that too. Right? So most people that I talk
They're
about...
going to make it unpopular
Yes.
to believe in... How could you support DeSantis?
Yes.
He did that thing.
So most of
As
the
a
people...
Christian, you're going to support somebody like that?
Right. Most of the people, right? If to your point, I bet you right now, if I took all the things that Trump did policy-wise, I didn't tell you the name above it. I just erased the name Trump. I laid them out, and I put them before somebody. They'd go, yes. That sounds like...
I want that guy.
I want that guy. That right there is the best I've seen maybe from the beginning, but since Lincoln, Washington. That right there.
Just ever. Just
Just
say it, man.
ever.
Just go there.
Right? That right there for the season where that's what I want. But what the media does a good job of doing is it goes, okay, let's cover that list. Let's start listing all of these reasons why the church shouldn't like him. Right? Locker room talk. He talked about grabbing the right locker room talk. Church, how dare you vote for a man that would talk about grabbing the right? Although, porn's at an all-time high in the church today. Although that. So because we do it behind closed doors in the church. And again, I'm not saying either one of these things are right? I'm just bringing up to go, because we do it behind the scenes and it's not brought into mainstream media about the pastor that slipped up or the deacon that acts, he's on his phone and something popped up and he clicked on it, and in a moment of weakness, right, because it's in front of our eyes every day and all day, in a moment of weakness I clicked on it, and maybe I even went so far as to masturbate to it, right? And I'm guilty of it and I'm mad about it and I hate my sin, and then all of a sudden the media gets hold of it and they frame it up as I love it and that's who I am, and I'm a man who loves porn and I want to advocate for it and I want more porn in society because that's how they spin it, and you're all of a sudden on the sideline going, that ain't how I feel. That's not what I think about porn. But you're listening to this instead of the reality of a situation that we all do things in moments that if the media could get a hold of it, they could paint us out to be the absolute worst people on the planet. I mean, it's not hard to imagine, right? That's all I'm driving at. It's not hard to imagine that if the media got a hold of my life and my moments of weaknesses that I've been a part of, they could paint me out to be the worst human on earth. You know why? Because there's no one righteous, no, not one. There's no one who does good. We are all people of weakness, and we all have weak moments.
I mean, just consider, based on that, if the media, this just easily reveal how unfair and unbalanced and hypocritical the whole thing is. I mean, if the media for 2 seconds would apply the same scrutiny to Joe Biden.
Oh my God.
Those... it'd not just stand a chance. He would pale. He'd make Trump look like a choir boy. But in the same, whether it's liberal in society or more liberalized Christian in their way of thinking, would, when you start putting the authority of Christ out there and the rule of God over the world and
when you start fighting for babies on the level he did, you better get ready for the enemy.
Well, yeah, sure. That.
Right? I mean, that's just a simple way of looking at it, right? When you start fighting for babies on that level, get ready, because the enemy hates the Imago Dei. He wants to destroy the Imago Dei. He loves abortion. He loves the death of children in the womb. He loves it. There's not a president on earth that fought for babies like President Trump has, ever. Ever. And I'm not saying that's the only reason. I'm not just bringing that up to go, oh, well, see, there you go. We could go down the list. But I'm just saying that's a big one.
Well, and it is, and it
should be.
It does highlight what I'm getting at, in that people would be quick to, if you're declaring the lordship of Christ and the authority of God, and that people ought to to submit to that, or God in some way he's gonna bring judgment on all this evil wickedness in the world, or you call out some aspect of society that is totally immoral and broken, and those people that are a part of it, and they would say, oh, a Christian, or Jesus loves people and Jesus forgives people, so we ought to be more tolerant or accepting, or approach people with more kindness and gentleness and that kind of thing. And there's a time and place for that, but yet they don't, and they use that to try to validate or justify like a godless liberal person who's not trying to honor God or do the right thing, just saying you shouldn't judge that person harshly. But yet, this man over here, who's another fallen, sinful human being, who, has things in his past and along the way, but yet he, in his office, in his accomplishments, he's done all these objectively true and good things that are aligned with our own worldview and our agenda, but yet, now he's a bad guy because he did that thing a long time ago, and you can't forgive that, or you can't move past that, or all you can see is that and not his accomplishments. But over here, you can't see a wrong that person did. All you could see is they're just an innocent person.
Sleepy Joe. He just has a hard time talking, bud.
Yeah,
and
how
he's
can
a
you
good
be
dude.
so harsh toward him? Look, he's just, an old man.
But I also think context matters when it comes to Trump, right? What I mean by that is, it's funny to me that, if you let's take two things you said. Number one is you said something about the level of understanding about the situation, right? I bet you I could go to most people in the United States and say, was it a good thing to drop a nuclear bomb on Japan? Was that a good thing? There's not going to be most churches are going to go, yes, it was. It was a good thing. To which I could go, how was it good to kill hundreds of thousands of people with a nuclear bomb? How's that Christian? Right? I could spin that on you if I want to take the entire out of context, and I could make you feel like a terrible Christian that you just said it was good to murder. I could go, you say it's murder? Hundreds of thousands of women and children in the streets of Japan? But you would immediately go, yeah, but for the greater good, dude. Whoa, what? What'd you just, for the greater good? Because we're trying to end the war, right? Because the context is understood. No one thinks that it's good that a bomb was dropped on Japan and hundreds of thousands of people were killed. No one should think that as a Christian, but it's called war. And sometimes wars are justified to end things for the greater good of humanity. We see that all through the whole Old Testament as well, right? So it's interesting to me that you can see that in that, we can see that, and we can ask the question, and most people in the church today would say yes. But when we talk about the greater good of Trump, we can't see that, right? We can't see how in any way that Trump's actions or his rhetoric are the things that he might do, although we don't like, just like we don't like killing hundreds of thousands of people with a nuclear bomb, we don't see how that could still be the same thing as the greater good of using those tools to expose, right? Using those tools to bring something out of the shadows so that for the whole world to see the corruption of what it is, right? I think that's kind of a good little thought experiment there, right? And it's interesting to me that church people just can't see that, or they can't understand.
We have the benefit of hindsight for one,
yeah,
and we're just in the midst of this current situation. Although we have a little bit of hindsight that we use to our advantage at this point. If you're not going to be deceived again, and look back and understand what's happened in recent years. But it also requires the right information and full information. So it could have been spun at the time that dropping that bomb is a wrong thing, and it was the evil thing that we did, and even now it I'm sure is controversial, but yet looking at the situation a certain way allows you to justify that extreme action.
Well, also knowing the outcome of it, knowing that it did end the war.
Yeah.
Right? What if we would have dropped it and it didn't end it? Well, people would have probably felt a lot different about it, right? So to your point, hindsight, well, okay, yeah, it was okay because it did end the war, and the cost of more lives more people didn't have to die because it achieved its desirable outcome. So it was good. Right, but that's easy to say looking back, right? What if it wouldn't have achieved its desirable outcome, right? And we still did it, So I think to your point, like those are. So I'm gonna ask you another question. Do you think here? Let's not go down the rabbit hole, but was it a good thing that Trump lost this last election?
I would rather him been president on certainly in certain respects. Firstly, God is sovereign.
Yeah.
So I'm not questioning
in the information
God's
war.
will. In it, it's ultimately good, but I definitely think it is serving a very useful, helpful purpose.
I do too. I mean, I look back at it and I'm like, man, I hate the things that are like you're saying, the things that are happening and God forbid, they drive us to the point. But like you said, God's in control.
Get worse.
Yeah, get worse. Where we're over here buddying with the Ukraine and pretending like, we just out of the kindness of our heart, we just care about Ukrainians. All of a sudden, they're just, we love them. They're our kinsmen. They're basically Americans. No, they're not in NATO, but they should have been.
The survival of democracy depends on.
Yeah, and okay, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis thing where we wouldn't let Russia put up military bases in Cuba, but this is different. Right? This is so different, and you ought to, But anyways.
Well, it's exposed a lot in the contrast from, because when Trump entered in, especially after the 8 years of Obama where we had really been lulled to sleep, or most of the population had been.
Yeah.
There were enough people that could see it, certainly, and that's where Trump comes from. That base of people who have seen where things were headed, and if you'd and there are probably a lot of simple folks who didn't have a lot of much of a platform themselves for people to hear their voice, but they're right about those things, and Trump was speaking out about the direction we've been headed for decades. It requires you to get out of the two-party system paradigm, thinking that it's Democrat versus Republican and all that stuff that just traps people. That's part of
we're not Bush fans either.
Prevents people from seeing the situation as it is. They're caught in that paradigm, and again, that's what has been useful about Trump is he is breaking us out of that and exposing it for what it is, and then through this Biden administration, he's both shown the corruption of the Rhino Republicans or the establishment Republicans or the establishment system, that deep state kind of apparatus that is the uniparty, the single party that controls Washington, that controls the policies. The lines have been drawn, and people have been able to choose their sides, and the people have been able to see more clearly, and then to just expose. Because if there was a candidate who would be most ideal to expose the corruption of this deep state system, the career politicians, how they use their positions for their own personal benefit, how they're tied up in these other countries, how our tax money gets sent overseas for these various causes and issues that are not in our interest. And I think we'll see this more and more and more as time goes on in the near future, but how like these billions of dollars being sent to Ukraine are just being funneled, laundered through Ukraine, going into the pockets of their local oligarchs, other financiers and people who are manipulating the system, but even our own politicians coming back to them, that money coming back to them in one way or another. And all this is being exposed, and there's more exposure to happen. But I think there's not many people that could demonstrate that better than Joe Biden and his level of corruption, but just how it, in all due respect to the position of president, how an imbecile
good for
like
you.
Joe Biden.
I'm not saying that.
How somebody like that could be in this
Sorry.
position. I mean, even now, just to see what kind of condition he's in and what a puppet he obviously is.
Former vice president.
Yeah,
Joe Biden.
I mean, and he was this same guy through the last 40 years in service, but all the more if he had a problem.
The fact you said 40 years of service is the problem too, man. He's been in that,
service.
Well, but he's been in politics for 40 years. My gosh.
Yeah. Plus, really.
Yeah.
So,
all right, two more questions. The other thing that interests me when it comes to Trump is that we pretend like the position of presidency. Like I'm not like when I go to my child and I say, "Hey, buddy, this is the moral integrity that I want you to walk with. Look at the president." That's not what I do, right? I mean, like that's not to say that the president shouldn't have integrity. I'm not saying that, but it's this kind of false assumption that it's like, yeah, you gotta uphold this integrity the way that we think you need to be doing it because we understand everything that's going on. I would say the same thing would be true with a military general on a battlefield, right? How would a Christian feel about the tactics that he's taking in maybe torture, right? To get information. Do you necessarily want to torture someone? No. But could information save? Yes. Right? So don't assume that we as citizens don't understand a special forces operator that, might be out in the field using tactics that he himself might not enjoy to be applying to people. But he understands the necessity of getting this information and in a timely fashion, which could ultimately change the direction of other things downstream, right? And so I don't sit here in my uppity high position and look down at that guy and go, that's not godly. I'm not going to do that because that's assuming that I know information more than this guy. And I'm like, dude, this guy's in the fight. He's in the battle. He's on the field. He's got so much more information. He knows if he doesn't get this, he knows what's coming too. And it might even affect me. Right? And so I think too, like that's another thing we do as Christians. We assume that we see the full picture, that we understand what's going on, and that all tactics ought to be these beautiful godly tactics. And guess what? Sometimes that ain't the case.
Well, and what's happening is that the Christian conservative is the victim or is at the receiving end of a tactic because the left and the media are only using that argument as a tactic. They don't care anything about the principles of that argument. They could absolutely care less. Their own morality demonstrates that they don't actually care about these things. They just are using it to undermine a candidate that they don't like.
That's right.
And to throw your whole side, your political side, into the disarray of not being able to line up and unify behind a candidate, which they're proved to be better at. But I would also say that it's just along the lines of what you've already said, but ideally, you would like to have a leader who is morally virtuous, and that's in every way, and to see them having exemplified that throughout their life. But of course, nobody's like that because we've already said that we've all fallen short of the glory of God. So there's things that anybody's going to be able to point to in their life. And going back to the analogy of like the general, if that general was, prone to maybe drunkenness or womanizing on the side, but he was proven successful general on the battlefield, then you leave him in charge because there's a war to fight.
That's right.
And you're not gonna have him teach your kids Sunday school, but you're gonna have him fight the war that he needs to fight. And so.
And you don't bring a Sunday school teacher, not saying that's who DeSantis is, and put him as the general because you don't like the fact this guy's a drunkard and a womanizer.
Yeah. So, it's just silly, and we're just gullible to fall for those arguments, unfortunately. They're persuasive, or, our convictions kind of get in the way. But it's because we're not used to thinking about these things, and we're not, we haven't quite been challenged by them before. Christians... this may come up. This would probably come up with George. This is coming on the heels of George W. Bush, who probably just pretended to be the evangelical that he was in order for them to win that evangelical vote. And then, because his dad was George H.W. Bush. And, these people, the irony is the point at Trump's so-called corruption and immorality, when how could you have this man as the president when all the preceding, at least 4 or 5 presidents were so, if we only knew the extent of their evil and corruption, or what happened.
But the evangelical church is all about George Bush, right? We're like, yeah. All right, final question. And let's try to keep this brief because I know this video is already going long, although this is going to be very difficult to keep brief. How much do you think a person's eschatology plays into this? I know this could be an entire video, that question right there. But how much, considering most people in the South, let's talk about people around us, are right? They're pre-rapture people.
They're most people are dispensational
premillennial. How much does that play into the idea of like a Trump or these things?
Well, I think it can go both ways as far as, because I'm sure a lot of those premill dispensational folks are pro-Trump. But then some of them, perhaps the most hardcore, that are trying to discern the end times and all these things, I'd say it goes a lot of different ways. It just depends on who you listen to, because then Trump might be the Antichrist, or Trump might be the false prophet, or Trump might be some other character in that system as it's been set up for you. Not necessarily the biblical, the picture that the Bible in the end is presenting, but many of the narratives that are painted and the interpretations of these things within that system.
So one thing that I think about is, like, sometimes premillennialists, they're so disconnected from it all. And maybe this is more, I don't want to frame this up wrong for all the premill people out there, because I don't know where I'm at here. Like, I see pre, all, post, they all make great points.
In particular, for precision, I'd say it's a dispensationalist, dispensational. That, because they're non-dispensational premillennial.
Yes, that's fair. That's fair. I find that so many people are disconnected from all this because they have this kind of flippant worldview of, like, well, I'm not worried about it because God's going to return and he's going to take us, and, none of this matters. I hear that a lot. And that might be the simplest of form of people in these positions, right? So I don't want to frame, there might be some people like, hey, that's not how I think, right? But a lot of people do in the South, right? A lot of people have been taught, don't worry about all this stuff. Don't get involved in all this stuff, because when it all gets at its peak and it all gets really dangerous, we're going to be raptured out of here. So there's no reason for it, right? I actually heard a guy talking about this on a show that I really enjoyed, and he was interesting. He was not he was a postmillennialist to some degree. But they said something that I really didn't like. They said, because I completely disagree with this, Ruslan, he's I like listening to his videos, but he's interviewing a guy, and they both were like, hey, just remember, Jesus is king, God's on the throne, and we don't have to basically worry about all this stuff. This stuff's not a big deal. We don't have to get engaged to certain levels in this. And it bothered me because I was like, man, that's the problem right there. That's the problem. And they tried to use Matthew 24, where Jesus says, flee to the mountains. And it was like, yeah, see, all these people flee to the mountains. And I'm like, yeah, and there was a bunch of suckers up there in the mountains probably that prepared a lot of food that got there ahead of time, so all those people didn't die when they got to the mountains. And there was probably, they were talking about preparedness, right? They're like, don't go out and buy a bunch of food and get a bunch of this. And I'm like,
no wonder it rubbed you the wrong way.
It did rub me the wrong way. I'm like, what? I'm like, they're like, don't go buy buckets of food. And I'm like, dude, I was trying to comment, but it wasn't live. I was like, so do y'all have car insurance? Do y'all have life insurance? Do y'all have house insurance? Why? Why do you have all that? Why are you worried about your car? Why are you worried about your house? What are you talking about? Why are you worried about all that? You're not supposed to worry about anything, right? I was getting fired up about it because I was like, how stupid. How stupid to say that when, you know what? They did all flee to the mountains. And you don't think some of the people died in the mountains of starvation, of lack of shelter, of disease, of infection? And I bet you the people that went to the mountains early and went ahead and built them a structure and put some food in. I don't know if they did this back then, but I'm just saying, those people were better off, right? So to pretend hey, don't worry about all this because God's in control and no pain and suffering can come upon us. If the world goes in shambles and crisis happens, God will just feed us with manna from heaven. No, He's not gonna. He's not going to put manna on the ground, right? It's so for me, it's that's one of the main problems is we just feel like we are protected from all this. From any sinful and broken thing in the world that can happen, nothing's going to happen to us, right? And so we may disagree on this point a little bit. I don't know. But all I'm saying is this kind of we don't have to worry about these world events, and we don't have to worry about all this stuff me and you're talking about right now because we're God's people. We're protected. That's not going to happen to us. No way.
Yeah, like you said, you open a big can of worms here. There's a lot of different paths, I'm sure, things that could be constructive to talk about, but based on what you're just saying, I think that generally, if we have eschatology is your view of the end times, end things, a study of the end. And so no matter what somebody's specific eschatology is, biblically we ought to be expecting the return of Christ, and that is imminent. Everybody shares that view that has any sort of orthodox view. That Jesus is coming back, and when Jesus comes back is a great judgment, and that is the final judgment, the end for everyone, and that's what ought to be imminent in our hearts and minds, because that could come any day or any time or any season, and we're only closer to that than we have ever been. But individually, we're not promised tomorrow. And so we need to reckon with these things because our end is inevitable. It is short, and we're going to face the judge of all the earth one day. So we have to be right with Christ, and when He comes in judgment, it is against all of those who are opposed to Him and all of the powers that position themselves against the rule of God, the authority of Jesus. And so it's a frightful day. And again, whether that's the individual, and that tends to be the way as Christians we think about these things these days, but just how we as individuals stand in relationship with God. And that's true enough. That's certainly maybe the most important thing. But through that, then we also, and biblically, we see that God wars against nations in a way, or the nations of the earth set themselves up against God in the knowledge of God. And some of those nations are entirely godless from the top down, from the bottom up. Nobody knows God, or very few people. I mean, if the gospel's penetrated and spread some, but many of those nations are ruled, and historically have been ruled by those who have a worldview and have their own religious outlook of some kind that is in opposition to the true God. And so there's coming a day when God will reckon with that ultimately and finally. But along the way, God has always been at work in the world, revealing himself, reconciling all things, especially humanity, back to himself through the right knowledge of himself. So he's revealed himself through his word, through his prophets, through men along the way who have spoken to his people. He's creating a people for himself. Through Israel he did that, but through the right knowledge of God, and that is to bring us back into a right relationship with God. So the beginning of that is the fear of the Lord. He reveals himself, and as we are reminded who the true God is, that ought to humble us in submission of him. Yeah. And in our humanity as individuals, but also as nations, because God rules the earth. And so there's not a nation or a people individually or collectively that has a right to operate outside of God's rule.
So maybe it's not an eschatology question. Maybe it's a question of how does God rule and what does he expect from his people? That's probably a fair question when it comes to this kind of thing of like, maybe it's a covenant question, right? Like what covenants are still there and what covenants are we supposed to still adhere to? What has God commanded his people? We're not going there.
Narrowing this conversation?
Yeah, no, I'm broadening the conversation. I'm just saying we won't go there in this video. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to talk about it in the future because we're talking about Trump and DeSantis here. But maybe the reason we at times, there is something, okay, I guess what I'm trying to say is there is something that has caused the Christian community to, in a lot of ways, disconnect from this. A large majority, a large part of the Christian community that have bought into this separation of church and state, right? So they think of that as we just stay in the church and let the state be the state.
The state is totally the world system, and therefore that's not our place.
That's right. And the idea that politics are not informed by a person's worldview, right? That we Christians are supposed to keep, right? Only us Christians are supposed to keep our worldview out of politics. If you don't realize that yet, right? The secular humanist, you are welcomed into politics. You are welcomed into the education system. In fact, we ground everything in the education system based upon your worldview, your faith position of evolution by natural selection. Right, which is a massive faith position which we teach nowadays in schools.
Yeah, I mean,
but not you Christians. Y'all sideline your worldview.
Well, you're not even allowed to assume the most basic supposition that God exists, which is the foundation for knowledge itself.
And I bring this up just to kind of round this whole conversation out because I think we started here. The reason the left hates Trump is because he's uncompromisable about some of the things that the enemy hates. Right? He just is uncompromisable. And he has not taken the position of the church, which is, just peace. We just need peace. Yeah, okay, we'll compromise. We just want peace. Right? We believe that Jesus would have compromised in these areas for peace because he's the Prince of Peace. And that's not Trump at all. And that's why I love him. Because he's uncompromisable, even if it means to pull the sword and go to war. He's not going to compromise. And what I'm saying is, darkness, the enemy, loves a compromiser. Because he's always going to win in the compromise, especially in the state. He's always going to win in that compromise. And so he just, get the casual Christian up there that's willing to compromise, and it just slowly, the compromise ends up pushing us further and further and further and further out. Put a man in there that's going to go to war against it, and the enemy and the darkness hate it. And they expose themselves in how much they hate it, and they're brought out of the shadows. And that alone ought to give a Christian, a Bible-believing Christian, whether you like or dislike Trump, that alone ought to make you go, there's something true and good about this guy, because the war that's coming upon him from the darkness is real. Because I know every time that I've ever decided not to compromise and walk in the light and try to walk in the light, the battle always increases spiritually. Always. And it's when peace comes upon me, typically when peace comes upon me when I typically decide to walk in compromise.
The appearance of peace.
The appearance of peace. Yeah, that's a better. I was trying to think how to say this without sounding wild with it, because Jesus will eventually bring peace, right? As you fight through it, right? A guy gave me this analogy, and I'll let you wrap it up after this, but he said, I thought this was beautiful. He said, you can go look this up, right? No BS, go check it out. He said, a cow and a buffalo out in the prairie, out in the west. He said, a cow runs from a storm when it comes. They start running in the opposite direction. And eventually, the cow is running and running and running, but he's not fast enough to outrun the storm. And eventually, the cow tires out and he lays down, and the storm still catches up with the cow. And then he has to sit there tired through the storm. The buffalo, on the other hand, when they see a storm, run directly towards it. And as the storm's coming, the buffalo's running at it, and it gets rained on, but the storm passes.
He makes it through it quicker.
And makes it through it quicker. And then he gets to eat in greener pastures on the other side. The church are a bunch of cows. We run and we run and we run and we run, and guess what? The storm still catches up to us, and then we're sitting there deflated as the storm is on top of us. And we need to be more buffaloes. We need to run towards it. We need to address it. And I'm not just talking about in this area of life. I'm talking about even in our marriages. I'm talking about even in our home life. I'm talking about even in the workplace. We need to run directly towards the storm. We need to deal with it. We need to work through it. And then we sit in the greener pastures of peace. What I'm saying is, it is not true peace. It is a deceitful view of peace to be running from the storm, pretending we're in peace because we're running. Right? Where the storm's not over us yet, so it's peace. And it's like, yeah, but it's coming. Right? And you can only run from it from so long, but it's going to catch you eventually. And then that disillusionment of peace is going to go away real fast. When if you just deal with it and put yourself directly under the storm, you'll find true peace on the other side of it, because the storm is past. Right? And so I just wanted to kind of...
No, it's good. And I mean, we play a part in creating the storms that come upon us, because the ultimate concern that we ought to have is whether we have peace, not with other people and groups and our place in society, but what's our relationship with God? Do we have peace with God, or is He hostile toward us? We're living hostile toward Him. And so the storms that come upon our life are self-inflicted, in that when, the people of God in particular, when they forsake God, then God is going to, His glory, His integrity, His name is at stake, and so He's going to bring a judgment upon that situation in order not to entirely destroy. I mean, there's going to be destruction. He's going to remove things that are false and wicked. He's going to deal with them severely, but yet the ultimate point is to cleanse, to sanctify, to make it holy, and then so that on the other side, then it more truly reflects Him. In this case, His people and His people's place in the world. And so, as much as His people are following in submission by the fear of the Lord, are following and obeying the commands of the Lord, then there's the reward and promise of blessing in this life in some form or fashion. That doesn't mean that life will always be easy, or it's not a prosperity gospel. It's just there's a true principle there. But even in the hardships that are bound to afflict us in this fallen world, they're meant to produce good in us. Hardship leads to that building of character and perseverance, and that produces hope in us, because God's Spirit is inside of us producing these things, and that's God's intention in it. So God remains sovereign and ruling over this sinful, broken world, and his ultimate intention is to bring his people through it, to renew the creation, and then it will continue forever in that renewed state. And so there's hope and joy, but the true goodness that we look for, that we long for, is only on the other side of that. Only after God destroys the earth, heaven and earth will be consumed by fire before God renews it all and we will live forever.
Back in Eden.
In the blessedness of his creation. So where our eschatology comes into play is like, do we really believe in that future? Do we really believe that same God is ruling now over his earth, and he is involved in it, and that we're called to submit and obey according to that? From every level, from the personal level to, as you go up society, government is according to the Bible, government is instituted by God. Kings are put in position by God to serve his purposes. They're an instrument of his justice. I would even argue that if you go back and look at governments throughout history that rather proclaim to be Christian or not, if they instituted the Bible or the values and the structure of the Bible, it led to blessingness. And secular leaders have found this to be true as well, by the way. Right? There's been many secular leaders throughout history, even in recent history, that have not necessarily worshiped the God of this Bible, but they have saw the blessing that follows by implementing this word inside a government structure. They have, right? They go, I don't know if I'm ready to worship this guy, but whoever he is, man, he knows how to run a government, right? And it does. It leads to more peace in the long run, right? In the long run. And it leads to more human flourishing. It leads to, I don't know why we would expect that considering it was written by God. But it seems like he might know these things. But anyways, moral of the story, if we had to round all this up, would be vote for Trump. Fear the Lord.
Vote for Trump.
Fear the Lord. Vote for Trump.
2024. See you guys.